3 shelves. There's amazing options out there for all you dishwasher people. I know we're live. I'm just saying there's amazing options out there.
Yeah, we like to have secondary topics that kind of float underneath the actual work we're attempting to pass off as work.
Well, it was a lot of work to put a dishwasher
work.
in. By the way, have you ever seen a guy my size try to squeeze under a sink? A lot of work.
I've seen many of the Farley movies, so I think I've probably seen some variation of that.
Yes. If only that weren't so accurate. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's a reenactment. So in just about 2, 3, 4 minutes, Hal stumbled into a discussion of visual media. Actually, our primary topic for the top of the hour is one narrowed aspect of visual media: slides, slide decks, PowerPoint charts, parchments, bed sheets. I don't know. We'll figure out the context
I
there.
once
But
had
we'll
a
get
whole
into that in just a
suitcase
few
full of
minutes.
bed sheets, by the way.
I may or may not.
Those are amazing, by the way. Can you imagine having to do the bed? I mean, we'll talk about it later. Can you imagine the time it took to do a bed sheet?
Oh yeah, I mean, like there was there was a period of time where flip charts, big pre-drawn flip charts, were the thing, and a lot of evangelists would sit there and pull those out and like build them and take days, months per setting to create those, and then they would use them in future meetings for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I remember talking to evangelists who had been using them for that point when I was just nearing 30, longer than I've been alive, using those same sets.
So that leads me to the question. I'm just going to steal the question. So outside of the preaching arena, okay?
Yeah.
What is one area, one thing in your life that in our lifetime, which when you think about it, technology's changed a lot in our lifetime, has gotten ridiculously easier, okay, that you can think of because of technology? Because when you think about what we're going to talk about today, going from flip charts and bed sheets, even to overheads to what we do now, it's just a radical change. So what's something else in your lifetime? I can get us started with one real quick. Pictures.
I got one, but yeah.
Pictures.
That was like my photography has gotten ridiculously easy.
Oh yeah. So when I was, I mean, this has been in the last 20 years because I was a sports sideline reporter for a small newspaper where I lived for the high school football team, and I had to take all the pictures. Okay. And we started off with film. Mm-hmm. And when you've got to pay to develop film, you get real picky about when you actually click the button. Because the other thing was, that was right at the end of film. That was like, I mean, you had to go to like Wolf Camera a lot to get stuff done right. And it was expensive. So like, and it was out of pocket for me. So my goal was to only do one roll of film. And you had to hope you got a good shot. And then like 2 years into that deal, I got the paper got a Nikon DSLR and with a good lens. And dude, I was clicking 300 pictures a game, like just holding the button on some place. It's ridiculous, the change between that. And there's a guy at church here who was a photographer for the newspaper here in Birmingham. And when he started out at 17, and he's like in his late 60s, retired, it was the big box one. It's holding the, so it's like his stories are ridiculous. So if I'm going to take photography, you got to take something else.
I'm going to go total childlike in this and talk about learning the secret moves inside of video games. Because as a child, the only way you could learn how to get the big
Easter
heads
eggs
or the super moves on any of the console games, even pre-console arcade games, was you had to know a guy. Like that
Known
was
as
it.
Easter eggs, by the way. Those are called Easter eggs.
Right. To find the secret level, to get the power-ups. It was only by word of mouth. And now it's full on.
Well, isn't that like the secret menu at Torchy's and In-N-Out and all those other places? Like used to, you had to know a guy. Now you just Google it. Oh, there's a whole secret menu here. Who knew that?
So that has gotten.
By the way, does that fall into research for Hal Hammons? That's what he said. I think that's still research.
I think that's research.
Libraries,
you can
man.
research relaxation. I think that's what that is. It's joy. You can research joy.
Yeah. Well, even like research for us. So like behind me are two shelves. That's the only books I own at this point. And when I started preaching, I don't know about you, but that's a fourth of what I used to own. And most of those are over there for sentimental value. I mean, truthfully, all those green ones up here, those are my dad's. I'm never going to get rid of those because of sentimental value. But yeah, another thing is communication. Dude, do you remember carrying a pager?
I do.
Yeah. I mean, we had little kids, right? So our wives
two different pages.
Yeah, our wives had us have a beeper so she could get a hold of us. Like at least when I was starting out, that was crazy.
My pager days were premarital, pre-FC even when I was carrying pagers. I don't think I've ever carried one after.
I might have been pre-FC. That may be blown out of proportion. I do remember back when I was like in high school, we had a cell phone, but it was in a bag stuffed under the seat, and it was only for emergency uses. You remember having the bag phone? Don't ever use this phone. It's only for emergency uses. Yeah. So like what we're going to talk about today, man, things in our lifetime have radically changed. Cars have radically changed. When you and I started driving cars, our cars were older. We changed our own oil. We did our own tune-ups. We did all kinds of stuff. You can still do that today if you want to, but it's a lot harder than it used to be because of all the computer stuff.
Yeah, you have to invest in a diagnostic tool. And my diagnostic tool growing up was a stethoscope. I need to be
you
able
ever
to
remember
hear.
How many times did you go out there have to beat the starter with a screwdriver?
Oh no!
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't do that anymore.
First car had an oil bath air filter.
It
was 1951 Ford four-door. So
crazy. All right.
Anyway. We don't want to just distract people with car chat or photo chat with Terry and Phil. Maybe that's more fun. Anyway,
so it does tie into what we're doing today because the things that we're going to talk about are really changed in years of my lifetime.
Right. One of the questions that came over the last couple of weeks was the process that can be used to develop your charts, your visual media, or your teaching aids when preaching, when teaching, when communicating the Bible. And us old folks have kind of seasoned through a couple of different experiences, and they've kind of become normalized or expected in some venues. I'm going to be a bit contrarian and say that they are overused, even by me at times. And I think that's probably something that we have to balance out a little bit better going forward. I know for sure the first time I had access to using a digital projector, I absolutely overused every ounce of the features in everything that I did.
You remember the 50 slide PowerPoints we used to do? Like our PowerPoints when I started off with like 30 to 50 slides. Every verse was on there. I was like circling and highlighting stuff. You'd spin it in, you'd slide the next one in, like tumbling over. Like I go back and look at some of the, like just the idea of some of my old presentations, and it just makes me want to literally kind of vomit. It's just awful. It's terrible. It's awful.
Yeah. We were turning ourselves into bad versions of teleprompters. Like it was teleprompter got wrong.
And I'll never forget that I got somehow a link to a presentations online magazine that was free, and it was for businesses. And so I signed up, and the very first issue, what I learned was this: I was doing everything wrong. I was completely wrong in every area. And I hate to say this, but if you're still doing your PowerPoint with 40 slides and a lot of different animations and using TechStart, today's episode is for you. This is for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put some context in there. We're going to break it down. We're going to talk a little bit about the past, a little about the present, and a little bit about what we can do to make these things better for audience retention. And I'll key into it with a comment that was made. I taught a class on visual media in the youth and congregations at a Bible study at the Warfield Boulevard congregation. I think it was up in north of Nashville, probably like 15 years ago. Clarksville. And the question was raised, hey, shouldn't these be visuals? Like, shouldn't these be pictures? Because that's what this stuff is used for. And at the time, that was a different thing for everybody. Like, how do we even get visuals into here? I don't have a camera. I don't know how to do that. And my point was, no, it's not really about that. These are communication tools. And yes, you can have a picture to tell a story, but there's some things to think through in that process because this is nothing new. So we're talking a little bit about that. We'll kind of connect those things and realize, hey, there's some important principles to keep in mind. So let's start about the past a little bit. I've got it sitting next to me. I was going to bring it out, and I may do it a little bit later. I've got an old film strip projector for a future episode about evangelism.
Jewel Miller.
And it is, and I actually have a full set available of the Jewel Miller film strip series with the accompanying cassettes.
By the way, they start off. I would give you more points if you had the vinyl that went with the original Jewel Millers.
Yeah, I don't have access to that.
By the way, think about the change in Jewel Miller, which is now available on DVD. I think one DVD, but they've gone from vinyl and cassettes to vinyl and film strips, cassettes, film strips, VHS. That stuff's been around a long time. But yeah, so look, when it comes to what we're talking about today with slides and charts, bed sheets were kind of the first, right? I mean, that was or flip charts, depending on your flavor.
Yeah. So all the bed sheets that I've had access to, actually, Jerry Earnhardt gave me his old bed sheets from his early days of preaching. We sorted through those and then sent a large chunk of them to the Philippines. So a lot of Jerry's bed sheets were used for a while in the Philippines to help with evangelism, and I think some of them are still in use. There's a couple of brethren that are still using them. So from a design concept, from a teaching concept, there's a couple of points in this past kind of thing that I want to emphasize. Whenever there's a new opportunity for a technology to come and play, we tend to overuse it. Felt boards, bed sheets, overhead projectors, then LCD digital projectors. We gotta use it every time. Eventually, there's a more normalized approach to each of these things. We're kind of past a lot of that, except for video now is being overused instead of other stuff. Mm-hmm. So the core concept that I use when I'm thinking these through is like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Part of what I have to recognize is I have goals that supersede making things pretty. But I have a tendency to want things pretty. I want them to look nice. I want them to not have the ugly edges. I want the colors to match. Less is more in that context. And so just a whole lot less. Some of the most clear tools in this area. Chalkboards are just death to humanity. If we could skip the chalkboard life, we'd be great. Someone just mentioned they don't get even a mention there. But clear communication. So just enough text on the screen to be legible and understood is probably best in most cases. A verse, a few words. Really, in the end, that's going to be the most powerful tool you have, is just getting the text there in a simple way. But Terry, what about your side? Talk about the pastors a little bit longer before we go. Oh, bed sheets.
Bed sheets. For those who don't know what we're talking about, this is all hand drawn. I mean, to me, that's what's so most impressive. I mean, the hours that go into this is unbelievable. And so these guys would use these repeatedly, obviously. Flip charts, you mentioned flip charts. The bed sheets just stand out to me because I think they're just crazier. And look, for some uses, like I can imagine in the Philippines where you don't always have the ability to plug something in and all of that, that could still be real useful when you think about it that way. So, and chalkboards and marker boards don't get a shout out. And I don't know about you, Phil, but I always didn't like using those. My handwriting's bad, and I don't like turning my back to people, which is all involved.
Practically speaking, most chalkboards were not positioned in a way where someone my size could make use of them.
I always love, by the way, when you go into like a 500-seat auditorium and there's this little green chalkboard, and you're like, who can read that? So
the chalkboard for me would have to be about 2.5 feet up higher on the wall to be. Otherwise, it was just like a place to.
You and I are like bending down to write on a normal chalkboard.
So I just kind of ignored them. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of the past, and we can make kind of observations, anecdotes about different things about them. But we don't really live in that context. There's a ton of tools, and with those tools, we got to be a little bit more precise in our use of them. And so let me talk through a few things on process-wise. Again, if my goal is to teach, to educate, to inform, then whatever I do with visual media should be supporting that and no longer be the primary thing. I need to make sure that that doesn't get in front of my message. And so if I want really slick, the best charts ever every single Sunday, and they're super cool, but the message itself doesn't resonate, then I've actually failed, even if I've really built the best super cool visual aids possible. The message is what matters.
Yeah, let me translate that then to those little simpler instructions for good preaching. Do not write your sermons in PowerPoint or Keynote. Write your sermons as you would. Like, even if you don't do a manuscript, you need to type out your sermon first. Your graphic stuff should be the final phase of your development, not the beginning phase. You should develop the thought of what you're going to preach and then decide how you're visually going to reinforce it. Don't go find some cool meme or picture and go, oh, I need to preach a sermon on that. That's not how this works. And I think it's a general rule, and I think this is true for you, Phil, as well. The design aspect of this is like the last step in my process of preparing a sermon. Because the meat of the sermon and the thought has to be developed first. And you don't know where a sermon's going and what the best graphic representation of that's going to be till you finish the actual sermon. So as process goes, as a general rule, design your stuff last. That's the general rule.
Right. And so I'm actually going to pull some pieces out of a couple of pre-existing, really old instructional chart sets here in a second to kind of make a point in regards to keeping things simple, but then we can sometimes not really understand what we're doing, even when we're trying to keep them simple. So let me share this guy.
That's awful.
That's my point. So
it's terrible. There's so many things on this that I could tear apart right now. It's terrible. Right.
This was actually part of a professional instruction program on how to use PowerPoint back in around 2000, 2001.
It's terrible.
And so, but I do want to make one quick point about it. There's two great things in this bad moment. The great thing, number one, is this teaches us a lot about how we respond on a personal level to what we think looks right, rather than thinking through on how someone will receive it. There's a certain percentage of people, when they see this chart right here, they won't actually be able to read the top line. The red section is invisible to them in some ways because of color blindness.
Yes.
Further, while these emotions are accurate, that these colors do actually kind of create this emotive sense, it doesn't work that way when we're actually doing communication. You cannot substitute actual emotion for art in this sense. So it doesn't work that way. But I want to point out that most everybody can probably read the dullest, plainest part of that. Black text on a white background. Dark text, light background, black text, white background, actually is super effective for communicating text. It's one of the best color combos you're going to find. That's why your books are those colors. That's why everything is that color, because you can actually read it from really far away. And so while everything in the content of this slide is bad, their little title verb is actually the very best thing you can do. So when you're building your charts, start with a white background, black text.
Can you take that down? Because the red is heightening my emotions, and not in a good way. I hate to let me explain what I mean by that, by the way. Red heightens your emotions because it is an extremely offensive color. That's why it heightens the emotions. It makes you more tense and angry, just in case you didn't know from a design perspective. So red is not a good
I made Terry feel better now. So that was just a quick illustration of one of the very bad things you can do.
Not to mention your terrible justification and alignment of everything on that slide. That was just wrong. Everything was wrong.
For the benefit of the instructional development group that built this slide, I'm not giving out the names of the individuals involved.
Well, but a long time ago, that was where we were with PowerPoint. And thankfully we have, I'm going to use a term people don't like, we've evolved from that. Thankfully. That is terrible. And I think that's one of the things that I think we need to emphasize, like you said, is all of those things have to do with design. And one of the things you need to do is educate yourself on what is good design work. And not everybody knows that, but you can learn. I think that's the key.
Right. And so again, from the starting standpoint, that's why I made this point. White background, black text, large fonts. Don't need the top 5 suggestions that come with your default software are probably the ones you need to be using. Seth Godin has the 20-20-20 rule. Nothing ever smaller than a 20-point font. No more than 20 words on a slide. And he's talking about any type of conference setting. So you might be a small group logic. That's your smallest boundary.
Part of that's knowing your projector in your room, by the way, Phil. Like, I think one of the things you need to do sometimes is go put a slide up and sit on the back row and see if you can see it. That's the issue that comes to play.
Right. I mean, these are kind of like steps to, like, so you've got white background, black text, your 20-20-20 rule. He talks about either, 20 point font, 20 words on the slide, and either 20 minutes or no more than 20 slides, depending on what you're doing. Because you may have a slide that has just the verses on it. 20 is a pretty good number, especially if you're not dropping content onto those slides, and each of those slides are actually 1 point per slide, which I'm going to talk about that in a second.
20 slides is a little lengthy, by the way. I mean, it's still a little lengthy for a typical sermon. Maybe not Bible class, but a typical sermon.
Right. For me, a typical sermon is probably going to be less than 7 slides for the
3
sermon.
for me.
And that's going to include repetitive slides that are intro, outro, context slides. For my approach to it, Bible classes is a different animal, and so I may have more or less depending on what we're doing.
Well, yeah, because you're going to throw maps and charts depending on what the class is, and pictures and photos and all kinds of stuff up there. If you're doing some history and geography stuff, that could easily get into a 30-slide thing, but half of those could be maps and photos of places that you've been to, especially you since you've been there, Phil. So a class is a completely different animal. I think that's one of the things to keep in mind is how you do class versus how you do a sermon should be different. They should be completely different.
Yeah. So again, that development process. You've got a basic platform, high contrast, white, black text, and then on the design side again, now you're going to say, I'm going to put this content there. The content should actually be relevant to the sermon that you're preaching, the actual sermon you're preaching. Just because you found on the internet, like Terry pointed out, this great image doesn't mean it's what you need to do in your media. Further, creating a sermon because someone had really great charts and you want to use their charts is not a great methodology. It doesn't mean those charts aren't valid. It doesn't mean those ideas aren't valid, but you're working in the wrong direction. You're taking a great visual and saying, I want to use this visual rather than I have a good idea, a great idea that God has given us in the text. I want to share it with people. Your process is backwards. Chris asked a question, do you recommend Ariel or Times New Roman font? I can't break from the Times New Roman. I would say this is what I do. There are times when I actually use Times New Roman. I use it, and here's the limited use of it, when I want it to look like it's inside a book. I'll use it for that visual aspect. But from a standpoint of design principle stuff, it's really hard to read unless it's really big, unless you make that font supersized. for a lot of
So
people, because that fine lining and that font is just not good for visual media for Keynote, because most projectors can't get that detail.
so
That's
here's
my
the deal
quick answer
about
to it.
here's the deal about typography. Okay, you don't know good typography, but you know bad typography. And Times New Roman for a long time was considered to be the most readable font, and it was used and it was overused. But also, that was at a time where there weren't a lot of options for fonts. And now there are literally millions of fonts, and there are some that are way better than Times New Roman. So I never use Times New Roman in anything. Um, Now, let me say this too. Your mind reacts to serif and sans serif fonts differently, and that's very important. And fonts like Times New Roman are more easily readable when in a book format or an article. That's your mind reacts to all those tails and weird stuff on the letters, and it's better. But I would rather use something like Cambria, which is pretty standard through Microsoft. It's a cleaner looking, newer, updated version of Times New Roman, and it is way better. And just look around. Calibri is way better than Ariel. It's a sans serif. So you got to look at newer fonts. Helvetica is a great chart font, way better than Arial. Very easily readable. It stands out better. So, and that's one of the reasons Helvetica is used kind of as a standard in Keynote. For a long time, it was the default that Apple put out on their stuff. By better, what I mean is it's cleaner. When you look at it, if you just compare it, it's cleaner. And one of the problems with Times New Roman is it's gotten so used that our minds don't react to it as well as we used to. And sometimes newer fonts actually create better responses. So they're cleaner, they look better, they're by better, it's a little pudgier sometimes. I mean, it just depends on what you're doing. But it's also, by the way, very good to mix sans serif and serif fonts together in your presentations. And like, so if you're doing a bullet chart, you could use one for the bullets and one for the main title, and that gives the main title. Like if you used Helvetica, it's going to be thicker. Okay, it's going to stand out more. You can do that. I don't. I use the same font. I don't know about you, Phil, but I use the same font for everything. And even when you're doing a bulletin, by the way, like we're not talking about bulletins today, but you should not have any more than 2 to 3 fonts on one single page. Your mind just can't handle that stuff. A lot of that kind of stuff, by the way, is covered. I'm going to go ahead and throw the book up there, Phil. If you've not read this book, by the way, The Non-Designer's Design Book by Robin Williams, you need to read this. This is a fantastic book. What is great about it is it actually shows you pictures of things you think look good, and then she shows you why it does not look good. And she talks about color, and she talks about alignment. Like one thing I think we don't realize is never center justify anything. Your mind doesn't react well to it. You need hard lines. All that's covered in that book. You need to get a copy of it. If you're doing your own design stuff, it's not expensive. You need to get a copy of it. It will change the way you look at things. And it's very important to do that. It talks about color. It talks about contrast. We talked about contrast of white versus black. One of the things to keep in mind, it's not as much a deal now, Phil, as it used to be, but when we start off with projectors, the projector's capability to provide color contrast was nowhere close to what your monitor in your office was. So you would do something that looked really great on your office and your monitor, really clear. You'd go put it up there on Sunday morning and not test it, and nobody could read a thing. And part of that's just learning your room and learning your device and learning your capabilities. And that's why, as a general rule, like I think you're like me, Phil, if I'm going to go out of town and I've never used a system before, it's going to be like white and black. It's going to be really strong color contrast between backgrounds and text for that very reason.
This is an example of that.
This is
bad. There's some good
do
things
not do
to
this.
it, but this is the result of it looks great on the screen to eyes that can see all the colors, but when you put it on the projector, everything washes into a useless color.
It's all like one muddled picture of purple up there.
Right. So there's a switch. So here we've got something that's got a little bit better color representation. So it's easy to read. You want a little style, it's got a little style. It's got all those components. You can even bring in emphasis in simple ways. A simple underline is still really readable on most modern screens now, where before you wouldn't be able to see it. You can even represent underlining in the text. And so this is a simple sermon set up for using all of that. It's got some details to make it feel like, hey, I've got some art going on. But it's so much more understandable, and it allows what you want to do with the text be the thing that matters. You've got good white spacing, you've got good formatting, you can read this in almost any venue. It's going to come across well. And here's the last benefit. It's actually easier. You're going to spend less time producing a great chart with something like this than you would trying to do any number of other things, which have great value, but don't have the lasting value you're looking for.
Yeah, and my style is a little bit different than that. I don't like a lot of slides, and I'm not going to put verses up there. That's just me personally. And I'll just throw up real quick like a chart from this week to kind of give you a different kind of view and to let you see what I'm going to do. Hold on just a minute. And so this is from Sunday. We'll talk about
standard the design, Terry, by the way.
Yeah, this is standard Terry. There's going to be a standard graphic. By the way, I'm not going to change those graphics for the most part, but they're going to be there. But you're going to notice a color contrast, but you're going to notice it's a white background with the dark text. And again, this is going to be able to see. You're going to be able to see this almost anywhere, whether it's a projector or whatever, because that color of blue, by the way, is going to still stand out. It's just going to look darker on a bad projector than on a good projector. That's going to be the difference because it has the white background. And you start to learn that when you start paying attention. And Colton mentions using TVs instead of projectors. Yeah, that's a great idea if the auditorium can handle that. But if you're in a 500-seat auditorium, that's just not possible. The TVs are getting better, but you'd have to put more TVs up. And depending on the arrangement of the pews, that may not be possible. Like currently, we have a screen up front and 2 side TVs, so everybody sees. But where I was at in Memphis, it was 2 screens, and you're kind of, because of the arrangement, so that it's really important to kind of think. You have to be able to adjust. And one of the most important things about this is there's a difference way you design your PowerPoint for your home congregation, where you know all the ins and outs, versus when you're going to another place. Like, you have to do that differently. I think you're the same way, Phil. Like, you've got to be careful about what you do. You might have to completely redesign something because you don't know. You don't want to plug in Sunday morning 30 minutes before church and not be able to see anything. And somebody mentioned older computers and fonts. That goes into that. But it's not that the older computers are the problem. What's really the problem is, unless you know how to embed your fonts, if you bring a presentation to another place and they happen to not have that font installed on that machine, it's going to go to a default font that is not going to be the same as what you use. That's really what the issue is.
Right. And so the way you can kind of skip around those things is I don't use animations in my slides, period. There's no animations. I do use soft transitions at times to smoothly go from one slide to the next. That's different than an animation. The distinction is simply I don't want anything moving on the screen. It's distracting. It's distracting to the audience. I don't like movement back there. I want to be able to have the attention be on where I'm drawing it. But the solution is, I used to do the same thing. I think a couple folks were mentioning how you can download the fonts and embed them. Great, to do that. It creates a little bit larger file. It's not a big deal anymore. But I don't actually do that. I do most of my design on Mac. I produce at the outcome. If I'm going to preach somewhere, I will push out a set of charts that are image only. They're actually just the essence of being screenshots of my 5 or 6 charts that I want to use so that everything looks right. And I'll only need to know one thing from the local church where I'm going to be, is what the ratio is of their screen.
4:3 or 16:9. And
that's all that I want to know.
Here's the other thing about that, by the way. If you do that and you do your charts, like, it depends for me. There's some presentations that I do just like Phil, because My bullets are all going to be, they're not really bullet points, they're just verses to support the main point. And if that's the case, I'm just going to create a series of images. And I'll talk about how to do that easy and not in PowerPoint, and it's free, and you can do that super easy here in a moment. If I'm going to use bullets where there's actually some thoughts as a subpoint that I want to transition in, I'm going to do it in PowerPoint, even though I'm an Apple guy and I like Keynote better, because that's what every machine's going to be loaded for the most part wherever you go. And Keynote can open PowerPoint usually pretty well, but PowerPoint cannot open Keynote pretty well. And so that as a general rule, that's what I'm going to do. And if I really want to avoid the embedded font issue, I'm going to make it a series of graphics, a series of PNG or JPEGs, and I'm going to just use those. And then what you can do is you can just transition the slide. And even if you, by the way, Phil, even if you want to scroll a bullet across, you can still do that by just having 2 images with the second bullet added. There's a way to do all of this in a way that makes it look like it is transitions, and they're not. So that's a good thing. Alex Hell, it does not make you a bad person. In fact, if I were you, I would shoot the lens with a BB gun and tell them you don't know how to happen. So
don't listen to Terry. He gives bad advice on the reg.
But so let me just throw out here, Phil. Generally speaking, using PowerPoint as a design software is a bad idea across the board. It's not impossible. It's just a bad idea. I'm going to pick on Edwin. He's not here, and I hate that because he's not. At least he's.
Are we sure he's not here, or is he? Well, actually, no. I know he's not here because
he's not here because he can't be quiet. For those who don't know, Edwin is a great author. And one of his first books, he designed his own cover in PowerPoint, by the way, plugged in high voltage prayer. And this is what it looked like. By the way, this is terrible, in case you don't know. And to give some point of reference, he's had 2 more versions since then. This is version 1 and version 2, actually. And then here's version 3 that is even way better than version 1. Okay? And by the way, this is the only copy of the book I have on hand because I love having the terrible version to remind people of this. This is before Edwin was told you're not a designer, by the way. And at the end of the day, and Edwin's my closest friend, by the way, closer than Phil, so even if he goes back and watches this, he's just going to be laughing about this. All that to say, there's better options, especially today. Especially today, if you've not joined Canva, you really need to join Canva.
I think that's probably the most cost-effective, unpaid or paid. The most cost-effective, efficient design tool. I still use Adobe Photoshop a lot,
right?
But on a weekly basis, I'll use Canva for 2 or 3 projects each week.
I use Adobe InDesign because I was more on the print side than the photo side, and they don't. You would think they would all work like a Microsoft, but it doesn't. And if you've not used Adobe, I used to tell guys to learn it. Don't just use Canva. It's easier. The learning curve is easier. Even if you use their pro images, which cost money, they are way cheaper than anywhere else you can get stock images. And what's nice is if you stick to their image search, they will tell you whether it's free or whether it's a pay-for image, and you won't have any issues with that. Okay?
Right.
I used to use Graceway Media. It just got to where it was expensive, number 1. Okay? And number 2, they actually combined with Igniter, I think it was, and the quality, Phil, went down when they combined.
I also used to use Graceway, Igniter, but their price went up, the quality went down, their quantity of things that I was using went down. They were not relevant to the exposition of the text that I tend to do. They were more relevant to topical stuff. It's still very good. Like, I'm talking about quality going down, quality from my use. For a lot of people, it may be the very best solution. And look, I'll tell this very plainly. If you've got the budget,
easy.
If you've got the budget and you don't have the skill, it's totally a great choice to purchase your background media, and because they've done the work. Like, there's still a good value there.
But
so
again,
guys,
I think
it can be good.
I think Canva is so easy. They have preloaded templates to use. It's not. I hate to use this term. It's not idiot proof, but it's pretty close. and it's a lot cheaper than using Igniter. Way cheaper.
Yeah. A lot of the
that's
non-design guys are using it, and I can tell when it's a Canva thing, but it doesn't look bad. Oh, you did Canva. It looks good.
If you get more skill with Canva, what you'll do is you'll take one of their preset templates and you'll turn things around and you'll move things around and change them. The PowerPoint I shared from Sunday is actually a Canva background that I took and used and made a little different to fit my needs. And it's way cleaner than a lot of things you could do. And it was way easier than me taking a couple of hours on InDesign to come up with my own design. And I'm a design guy. So Canva's super easy to use. Canva, when you do a presentation, is going to want to do it like as a movie. But you go to your download options and you download your slides as images, exactly what Phil and I were talking about earlier, and then you take those slides and you paste them into PowerPoint or Keynote. It's that simple, and it's free. That's the key, is it's free. There's some other places that I use, Church Edge, when they gave a really cheap discount. But honestly, if I'd have been using Canva as much as I am now, I probably wouldn't have paid the money for Church Edge, even though I got a lifetime membership for it. Canva's just way better.
I also use WordSwag a lot for social media posts. Great for overlays. Their font manipulation that's kind of built within it is not super intuitive, but it's pretty good. And so that's another great option. By the way, it allows, like, using Canva on the paid side lets you have thematic sets. So if you have a set that's built for PowerPoint, you can also produce sized stuff for social media use, for stories, for square posts, banner posts. Like, they're not perfect.
You can do that. You can do that without paying. You can do that without paying if you know what you're doing, because you can cut and paste from one to the other and shrink it down and make it fit and manipulate the way you want to. There's a way to do it that doesn't even cost you to do that, by the way.
Again, with all this, you're balancing, do I learn the skill? Do I pay for the skill? Just like with anything else, there are times when you decide, hey, this is a skill I'm going to use a lot, so learn it. But if you're not going to use it a lot, then it makes more sense to pay for it at incremental rates rather than to learn the skill. And design books, design instructions.
You're going to do it enough to buy this. I'm telling you, you're doing it enough to spend the $20 on this. And you can buy a lot of other design books, but this is the one that guys like Luke Adams and other guys that are actually in marketing and PR, they still go back to this. This is considered to be the Bible of design. So college courses around this is the book you need. I promise you to get that book. If you've not already gone to Amazon, buy it. 16 to 9, by the way, Colton, is becoming the standard for everywhere. We've slowly in the church transitioned from 4 to 3 to 16 by 9. I don't know when the last time I went somewhere, Phil, that was 4 to 3. It's been a while.
Generally, it's just about how old their setup is. And so if they've installed something newer, and let me put two caveats. Most churches of Christ that you're going to interact with are going to be membership numbers less than 100. That means their buildings, unless they're older, are going to be sized for more close settings. And so you're going to see them using televisions. A good 70, 80-inch flat screen is going to be perfect in those smaller venues. Really easy to read, really great contrast. And they're going to be 16 to 9 or something close to that. 4.3s are going to really be older buildings that haven't changed their projector screen. They may have had a massive one back in the day, and so they just got a projector that can still render in that output, when they probably would be better off raising the screen a little bit up and changing that ratio, and just accepting a slightly smaller canvas to work on. That's the context that most preachers are going to be in. I don't know of any local churches of Christ that are using LED walls, but at that point you're in a whole different world anyway, and so nothing we have to say is of value to you.
Yeah, if you're at a congregation, by the way, that has a seating capacity of like 150 or less, you should not be looking at projectors anymore. You should be looking at some of the larger screen TVs. That's what you should look at because of a lot of reasons, but they show better in every aspect. They're better. 16 to 10 I've not heard of, Colton, and that's odd. I would say it probably sounds like they may be 16 to 9 and they just messed it up, but even at that, if you did 16 to 9, it's not going to be noticeable. If it's 16 to 10, You may get there. Just don't put anything. Here's my advice on that. Don't put anything on the edges. Like keep it all pretty centered in case you get there and something runs off. Which should be a general practice anyway.
Yeah, I think it has to do actually with native resolutions for PCs, Androids, and stuff. Because native stuff for PCs, I think, is 1610, and native stuff for multimedia is 16.9.
Yeah.
Really, you're not going to see an output difference. And if they're trying to do that, like 1610 is native 1280 by 800. That's what it is, or 1440 900. The difference is 16.9 is 1080p, 720p, and then 4K resolutions. And so computers live in 1610 world. Video that everyone's really accustomed to. That's why TVs, they're going to be 16.9, and that's the difference.
That's why I find very odd about a 16:10 ratio. If they're using, that'd be a really massive monitor that I've not heard of, by the way, from a computer side of things, which may be out there.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get a monitor that big, but you are going to get projectors that can do that ratio because they can do whatever. They'll just block off the unused parts, and you won't even know that it's happened.
By the way,
that's why that difference is there.
The other advantage of a TV versus projector is you don't have to worry about the decay of the bulb. Like one of the things with the projector, by the way, that you got to worry about is over time the bulb just loses its power slowly. And you don't realize that until you've had a bulb for 4 years and then you go in and replace it. And then you see this massive difference. And while things are better and technology is better now than it was 15 years ago, and I don't know if you remember that, Phil. I mean, at 2 different places, I've helped pick out their first projector. Like I've been through that process. What a process that was to think about DLP versus LCD technology and all these kind of things that we used to get into, numbers of contrast ratios and all that stuff. And today, the reason I say just don't even mess with the projector is if the size works. And by the way, one of the good ways to do this, Phil did this. They just switched from a projector to a TV not long ago. Is he made a slide to put up there with a projector that showed the differences in size of the TVs and those kind of things, so he could see. We have one more step, and we put blue tape on the wall to represent the different TVs, different projector options, and to kind of first step it as we're going in here. Like, what will this be like when we do that? Like, what will be? What are we getting with the old? What's the new going to look like? That had nothing to do with contrast and brightness. But it did show us, hey, we're getting about the same space with this new screen, usable space. So those are kind of the things, and by the way, once you get that good screen up there with a modest quality stream, you can totally read the projection image in visual media that I'm using in our live streams. We don't have to use an inset box if we don't want to. We can frame me and the TV into the shot, and that TV is readable at a high definition image. So we can do those image on image stuff, but you don't have to. That's another good benefit of having like good contrast. We do image on image stuff just to make me smaller so people don't have to look at me.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah, that's the advantage.
So again, on the process side, looking back at some of this stuff, there's still great value in some of those old mechanical methodologies. There's still some art departments that use overhead projectors. There's still some development purposes for the bed sheets, for the flip charts. I think you can still purchase, by the way, some of the evangelistic chart flips for the big picture of the Bible. They made those things, and so that technology hasn't gone away. It's just gotten more into specific use cases. You're going to use it here. You're going to use it there.
Yeah.
Going forward, understand that right now we have seen green screen technology take place to where, in essence, you can use your backdrop as your teaching space. And here's my illustration of that. When they filmed The Mandalorian, the filming of that new production, they filmed a large part of it inside of an immersive digital environment. They used the engines of video games. The Unreal Engine produced most of the worlds you see those actors walking through. And so they combine practical prop work with digital backgrounds, and it looks real. It looks indistinguishable. And I say, what does that have to do with me teaching? Well, we don't have that kind of budget. But now we can do things digitally that are really similar. Let's say you want to do a class about archaeology, or you want to talk about Egypt, or you want to talk about Jordan, or you want to talk about the River Jordan. You can actually sneak yourself in to those settings by using those as your backdrops in your teaching classes. So you can be teaching virtually from the edge of the Jordan River about the Jordan River, and it looks realish. That's right now. What's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years? Whatever was going on in the movie theaters is going to be going on in the teaching environments, and you're going to be walking around inside those events, much like they do in big production movies, because that's how it works. It will become cheap. That's my prediction for the future. Let's go on.
Well, that will be interesting to see you being basically Max Headroom at some point.
That's right.
Still waiting.
Well, that's where you are right now with your glitches and your twists. My hair's already there.
Your hair's already there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of like, I think, some good stepping stones. I'm going to keep it simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. Recently, I sat in a class where the instructor used white background and simple text on the screen, and it was the easiest retention of information I've had in a while. And so
let me explain real quick what keep simple really means. Use one transition, don't use a bunch of them. Use one font, don't use a bunch of them. Use one background, don't use a bunch of them. That's what keep it simple means. When we talk about keep it simple, it should look very uniform. Every slide should come in the same way. Whether that's, and it should not be spinning, by the way. Never, all those neat things that you think are cool, just don't. Like every slide I do wipes left onto the screen. That's it. It doesn't do anything else. It's just going to wipe left. You see it, Terry Francis, unless I justify hard right, then it may wipe from the right, but it's just going to wipe from one side to the other. That's all it's going to do every time. If you see Terry Francis' presentation, that's what's going to happen. The fonts are always going to be the same. They're going to be the same size. There's going to be very few words on the screen. Keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah. I have the simple transition every single time. It fades from one to the other. It's a very quick fade. It's subtle, so it's not distracting. Number two, same fonts are used throughout the entire presentation. Same structure, same font size. Everything's big. It's going to be able to be read from the back.
If you use PowerPoint, the way to do that, by the way, if you're not familiar, is to use the master slide option to go in and change your master slide to do everything you want to do, and you don't have to change each slide. If you don't know how to do that, send me a message and I'll walk you through it.
Yeah. Going forward, if you have specific questions, we're more than happy to answer that stuff. The process for any of my classes and stuff is really much the same thing as class, sermon, private Bible study. Whatever matters needs to be what matters. And so that's what goes on the front of the things. And I want it to be precise, short wordings, memorable, so that we can get back to the attention of the message itself. And that's a process to get there. Less is always more in those environments. As we close out for today, reach out to Terry and I if you got questions about this, about other aspects of the work. I want to bring to the forefront a really important conversation. At least it is for me. Maybe it will be for you. Those of us who've been preaching for a little while look ahead to days when we don't necessarily see ourselves preaching in the same way, and we wonder about what our legacy will look like. Legacy for our families, legacy for our congregations, legacies for our relationships. And an important part of Terry and I's relationship is in fact due to a person who has passed away recently. Ed Harrell recently passed, and Terry probably had a healthier relationship with Ed than I did. But I want to make it a couple quick points. And I say healthy as well developed. He and I never had any negative words to one another. We never spoke evil of one another. But because of poor decisions on humankind, I never was given the privilege of getting to know a person who probably would have helped me immensely. And I want to encourage those who are preachers to make sure that in the way in which they interact with people around them, they learn to think that the value of the relationship will never be seen in the short run. You will always see it when you no longer have the access to go ask a question. And so don't allow folks to push you to think that you have to not talk to or talk to someone. Learn to value the benefit that comes from knowing people who share a common commitment to God, a common encouragement to spiritual integrity, and learn from them. And as Ed's family is dealing with no longer being able to reach out to their beloved one, that's how it is for a lot of us. And so really learn to value those things when they're there, and don't push them away just because they're different. Those differences can actually make things stronger. Terry, do you have anything to say about any of that? I know I was probably surprised.
In fact, I'm going to read it. It's not too long, but I'm going to read a quote that's been shared on the internet that I posted the other day that Ed gave at a conference. It was an impromptu statement that he made, which speaks to just the mind of Ed Harrell. He and I were super close, but I can tell you that the time I was blessed to spend with him, he was always an encouragement, and more importantly, I was profoundly impacted by almost everything he shared. And I was blessed to be able to have that relationship. And in one of those classes that he had taught that I was blessed to be with for a week, he shared this, and he would share this quote a lot. So I'm going to read that, Phil, and you can do whatever you want to do with that. But he said, "I am a restorer, unbowed, undaunted, extremist, and eccentric. A period piece and a disciples of Christ's movement grown increasingly uncomfortable with the intellectual, social, and psychological pitfalls of restoring New Testament Christianity. The centerpiece of my intellectual universe is biblical primitivism, a search for the first pure truths and ordinances. I am seeking that elusive image of Christianity as it came from the mind of God. You may say it's not there. It is an illusion. I have decided to seek it anyway. We live in a world of illusions. You say I will not find it because I carry on my back the baggage of my own past, the culture in which I live, of the language with which I think. Self-consciously, and with this as much self-awareness as possible, I have decided to try. You may say I will fail and be disillusioned. So far, I have not. In a sense, all restorers are seekers, though sometimes we may think otherwise. Yet I will not become cynical or despairing because all truths are not readily apparent, but rather I am joyous and thankful that we have come this far by faith. To be a restorer has always meant to be an explorer in search of Zion, bound to grope in our own human and cultural maze, never finishing our task, but ever learning through struggle and commitment to the truth. But I have never been alone. God has provided others of like mind to be my fellow travelers. It has been a rigorous journey, but I know existentially no other way. The search has served me well, and should you come to look for me, you will find me a bit further down the same road." And all I can think of is that he's finished that journey, and I'm so grateful for him to have received his reward at this point. He was a tremendous impact on me and on others, and he will be missed.
Remember, whoever you are right now is not whoever you need to be. Ed Harrell dropped out of the Naval Academy after 3 years to attend David Lipscomb and to turn himself into an academic when, I think at age 25, he didn't think he could write much of anything. And so whoever you are now is not whom you need to be. And whoever you are going to be is something that can be of great value to the kingdom. And I encourage you to be transformed. If we can help you in some way, let us know. May your day be blessed. Take care.